Hey folks, I'm Steve Butler. Woodworkers are notorious for saving those offcuts. Today, we're going to use some of my saved treasures. From the offcut bin to the kitchen table. Come see what we're building here in the garage. All right, let's have a look at today's projects. The first thing we're going to build is a rendition of my well-loved cutting board. And we're going to use some ash and some walnut offcuts I have left. Second thing, we're going to make some salad tongs. Now these ones were made out of cherry. We're going to make ours out of maple. And then third, we're going to make some chopsticks. And we're going to use a jig I made, and I'll show you how to do that. First thing we need to do is go to the table saw and cut our pieces to size. Yeah, this project came about a while back. I was asked to make a cutting board as a housewarming gift for friends of ours. So, like most woodworkers, I have saved a lot of offcuts over the years. And I just went to that bin and I took out some strips of hardwood I had and I put them together in a pattern I thought was pleasing and created a cutting board for them. So I just thought, along with some other things, it would be a great project for the show. All right, our cutting board is made up of 5 pieces. We have 2 pieces of walnut and 2 pieces of ash that are cut at 2.5 inches. And then we have a center strip of walnut that is cut at 1 inch. So I've set my fence at 2.5 inches, and the first thing we're going to do is rip our walnut pieces. Now I've raised the blade to 1/4 inch above your workpiece. That's about where you want it. And if you're ever in doubt, just the thickness of a pencil. All right, I'm going to turn the dust collection on and we'll get started. All right, there we go. Now I'm just going to set the fence to 1 inch and cut that center strip of walnut. Yeah, I have a template I use now to trace out the pattern because I make a lot of these. You can laminate them like I did here, or you can make them out of small pieces of wood, solid wood, and use them as cheese trays. All right, I've set our fence to 1 inch, and we're just going to go ahead and rip that walnut strip, which will be the center portion of our cutting board. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses, some hearing protection. I'm doing a lot of talking, but when appropriate, wear a dust mask. All right, let's get started. All right, there we have it. We have all our parts that make up our cutting board. Now this is hardwood, so the sawn edge doesn't always close up properly when it comes time to clamping and gluing. There's a little bit of a gap. So I'm just going to take a pass over my benchtop joiner just to clean these up. All right, I've set up my 6-inch benchtop joiner. Now we're only using 3/4 inch thick stock, so I've moved the fence inward to expose less blade. It's only dangerous if you don't. I've set it to take a 32nd of an inch off. We're just taking a light pass. We just want to close up these gaps of our boards. Now, we have it clamped down. safety glasses, hearing protection. You also want to make sure, and at first it can be difficult to figure out. So do some test cuts, but we're trying to figure out the grain direction. We want a nice smooth cut. You think of it as patting a cat. When you pat a cat, you pat a cat from the head to the tail. The fur is nice and smooth. You go in the other direction, it stands up and it's rough. Okay, put our dust collection on. Let's get started. All right, these look great. We're just gonna go to the bench and glue up our cutting board. Yeah, you can finish this any way you want. I'm using mineral oil, which is non-toxic. You can buy it at any drugstore or grocery store. You can also, if you wanted to, route what's called a juice groove on the board. But I like leaving it blank because sometimes we use this as a serving tray as well. All right, we're ready to glue up our boards. What I did is I went ahead and I drew what's called a cabinet maker's triangle. And that's just to keep them in order. It's easy to get confused and line up the boards in the wrong direction. You want to make sure you have everything handy, a mallet in case you need it, a cloth to wipe up the excess. I'm just going to go ahead, flip the boards up, and run a bead of glue along the edge. Now, you don't need a lot of glue, but you don't want to starve the joint, but you want to make sure you don't put too much on. You're just going to spend that time cleaning it up. So I'm just going to put a bead of glue along the top edge. Some people use a brush, a card to wipe the glue all over the edge. I just put a fine bead on there, and then when I turn it over, the glue runs down that edge and we get coverage. All right, just turn these over. I'm just going to slide these along to create a little friction so when I put the clamps on, the clamps don't slide. Let's butt these up and just want to make sure they're flush. If you have problems keeping these flush to the clamp, you can put a little C-clamp on there. Just want to make sure they're not proud. We're going to sand these up afterwards. Okay, put some light pressure on it first, and we want to alternate our clamps. We have ones on the bottom, now we put one on top. And the reason for that is if I had them all on one face, the boards could buckle, and we certainly don't want that. These clamps are also aluminum. If they were steel, I'd have some pads underneath there because the moisture in the glue reacts with the steel and sometimes can stain the wood. All right, now we'll just tighten these up. And that's what we're looking for. You want to see some squeeze out. You want evidence that the glue is covering and doing its job. Okay, now I didn't cut these boards to length, and the reason for that is the cutting board we're making has a slight curve to it, so we'll end up going to the bandsaw to cut that curve. We're just going to let this cure. While we're doing that, let's go start our salad tongs. Yeah, these tongs have quite a wide curve on them, so the blanks I used were really thick. You could use narrower ones and just have a shallow scoop for the spoon and just a straight handle. All right, let me show you what I did. Now, I have some cardboard templates that I use for the salad tongs. And what I did is I just took the template and I just traced it on the edge of my maple blank. And that's what we're going to cut out first. If you don't want to make templates like that, you can simply print them out, draw it on paper, print them out, cut it, and then use some spray adhesive and glue them right to the block. So, all right. Same rule follows as on the table saw. I've set the blade so that it's just the thickness of a pencil, 1/4 inch above the workpiece. No sense exposing more blade than necessary. We're going to let this come to a full start, and we're going to go ahead and cut that profile. Make sure you have a scrap piece to use as a push stick at the end. Just take your time. You don't want to jolt when you're cutting the curves. You just want to take it nice and easy and follow that line. There we go. That looks great. I'm just going to turn around, do the other side. All right, there we go. We have the profile to our one salad tong. I'm just going to go ahead and do the other blank. All right, let me show you what I did. After I cut both profiles, and this is why it's important to keep those offcuts and keep them in one piece. I went ahead and I taped one offcut onto the profile, and then I drew the pattern. And why this is important is this gives us a flat, sturdy surface so that we can run this through the bandsaw. If we didn't have that, this would be bouncing all over the place, and that's dangerous. Now I've lowered our blade, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut this profile out on our flat surface, and then do the same thing to our other salad tong. Again, make sure you have a scrap piece just to use as a sacrificial stick when you come near the end. I'm just going to get rid of some excess first. All right, there we go. You can see how that's coming together. I'm just going to go cut our other piece, and then we'll go to the sander and final shape them. Yeah, we use the bandsaw to cut out our salad tongs, but if you wanted to, you could do this completely with hand tools. A lot of people use the whittle spoons. You could use a draw knife or a spoke shave and cut them out that way. All right, these look great. What I did is I went ahead and installed an 80 grit sanding belt on our sander, and that is going to help us final shape our tongs. And then I'll just sand them smooth by hand. Here's a tip for you. To clean off the sanding belt, because they get really gummed up, especially if you're using pine, a lot of pine pitch sticks to it, and you use these sanding belts to clean them up. They're made out of a product called crepe rubber. Well, soles of shoes are made out of the same thing. Not all of them, you have to look for it. I'll go to thrift stores, discount stores, and I'll find an old pair of boot or shoes that are made out of crepe rubber, and I'll buy them. I buy them for $1, $5, a lot cheaper than the crepe block itself, and I'll just take the soles off, and I use that to clean my sander. All right, let's get started. All right, these look great. A little hand sanding and they're done. I'm going to go take our cutting board out of the clamps and we'll go cut the shape on the bandsaw. Yeah, we're using the face of the board to make our cutting boards, but traditional cutting boards, really good ones, are made with the end grain up. It's actually the hardest part of the wood, believe it or not. So imagine a butcher block, and that's what you'll see in that. All right, I went ahead and I took the cutting board out of the clamps, and I used a scraper, a paint scraper, and I just scraped off the excess beads of glue. And then I just drew a pattern on here that I thought looked nice. You can make this any shape you want. It's your cutting board. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cut this on the bandsaw, and then we'll sand it, and this will be done. All right, you can see how that's taken shape. I've cut our ends. Now I'm just going to cut lengthwise and save these little pieces. There we go. That looks great. We'll just sand it up and it'll be done. All right, for our next project, we're going to make a pair of chopsticks. Now, I'm using some walnut, but you can use much nicer hardwood if you want. And I've cut them so that they're 1/4 inch square and 10 inches long, just to fit my jig that I made. Now this jig's a little crude. I used some offcuts I had and just made this jig. And let me show you what's involved. So I'm going to sample one here. Let me unscrew this. I took 2 pieces of wood and I cut a rabbet on them. And then I have some center pieces. This one acts as a spacer. And this one is on an angle. It tapers. And that's the taper of my chopstick. In this case, it's 1/4 inch lower there than the surface, and 1/8 inch there. I then added another piece to add as a stop to butt up the stick blank against it. When I put this together, what it does is creates a space that's perfect for my block plane. Now, I'm using a block plane. If you're using a different plane, you might want to make this jig a little wider. What I'm going to do is just simply put this in the clamp. Take our blank, fit it in here. Now the back end is perfectly flush up against our stop block, and just take our shavings. I'm set at a pretty fine shaving, and we just keep cutting until we get our taper. Yeah, it's a simple jig. It's basically a sandwich, you know, two outer pieces, and our inner piece is what creates the taper. We just line it up on that taper, and this area is just wide enough to fit my hand plane I'm using. So you can make yours to fit any plane that you're comfortable using. All right, you just want to keep turning it until you get all four sides done. All right. That looks great. There we have a chopstick. Just gonna go ahead, do a second one, give these a light sand, and we're finished. I'm certainly not an expert on chopsticks, but through this project I have learned a lot. And there's all different styles of chopsticks, but there's three main ones. And the ones we made are more of a Japanese style chopstick where they taper but they're pointy. And apparently it's because a Japanese diet, correct me if I'm wrong, consists of a lot of fish, which is bony, so the pointier chopsticks are appropriate for it. Chinese chopsticks are a little more square, and Korean chopsticks are square but also made out of metal. All right, these look great. I took the offcuts from the cutting board and I just made a little holder for the chopsticks. I went ahead and I sanded our cutting board. If you wanted to, you could use a router and just route the edge, but I just softened it with some sandpaper and that feels good. Sanded our salad tongs. I think these came out really well. And we have our chopsticks. All right, as usual, I had a blast making these projects with you. Save your offcuts, and I hope you come back and see us again in the garage.
Just found your number, thought I'd drop you a line. You know I've been out on this road such a long, long time. Just wanted to let you know I'm doing just fine. But hey, I'm doing fine out here on the road. As long as I have friends to call, I'm never alone. Folks wonder how I take off.
Hey! Hey! Oh man. All right, let's get serious now. We have a show to produce.